The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Okay, let's go ahead and get going. Good morning or good evening, everyone. My name is Ray Arell. I'm with the Agile Alliance. This is episode 25 of the Agile Coaching Network. What a run we've had. It's actually been, I think, a pretty darn good year. We've picked up over 600 people who've decided to enroll and be a part of the Agile Coaching Network, as well as, if you look at people who go up onto the Agile Alliance site or even on LinkedIn and others, there's been some people that have been promoting this conversation that we have on a monthly basis. And I really appreciate all of this. We will not be having another meeting coming into December. December will be a little bit of a time off. So let's go ahead and get started. For the last couple of months, we've been going through the Agile Narrative Project, and this is where we've been collecting stories from the greater Agile community, and we've collected several hundred stories of good things that are going on with companies that are trying to adopt Agile. And also, we've been getting some bad stories. And I think the last couple of months, we've been more focused on, how do we see less stories of this really awful thing that might be happening to somebody. But this time, I actually wanted to go pick on one that actually was a good story, but it was considered from this person's perspective to be rare, meaning that they don't see it consistently across their organization today. But the way that the story goes is that Agile practices reduce over time and improve work-life balance. And the story goes, in the beginning of 2012, I started as a Scrum Master as a part of a large company that would not have traditionally applied Agile. We're not a software development company. Through using Agile practices, we reduced overtime. At the same time, we've been maintaining our release pace and our product support. This is a high hope story, considered to be of high value. The manager agrees with it, the middle manager agrees with it, and the executive is neutral. And this is a fairly large company. So the question is to everyone here is, how do we create more stories like this?
Impressive story, because what I've seen a number of times was that the improvements in efficiency have been used to even drive up more output. So if they really took and cashed in and they reduced the overtime required, this is fantastic. And I think to produce more stories like this, we need to educate, again, the leaders of these companies who are using agility, because we need to get away from the promise that agility is increasing your output. It should be rather a mixture between getting more things or better things done, and at the same time reducing the stress level on the people.
Do you think that might be involved with, one, even just measuring stress in the environment? I don't know how many teams do that today.
I think that there are measurements, at least in the surveys in most companies. There is an element that is looking at stress level or overload level of people. And I think we need to take these super serious.
I think one thing really to strengthen this is to make the last minute mistakes visible that people do if they are maxed out. I've seen it very often in my business career that people work in the evening trying to get something done. When they come back next morning, they do it immediately. Whenever this is visible enough that the progress comes naturally the next morning, and managers can detect this immediately, the demand for staying longer is significantly reduced. And the other thing that I've seen, that really committed teams will always go that last mile if it makes a difference for the product. So if you're really going to launch and you do that additional test to be really, really sure that you don't have to fix anything, that's a very simple no-brainer, because next day this will not happen again. And again, this visibility of if it really matters, you get everything out of the team. Is something that feels good for the team and feels good for management. So if you combine this with a success story of a brand new idea, some serendipity that would never have happened under stress, discussions start to go into the right direction. But I agree, it's much too rare.
One thing about I think both of you sort of hit on this. Today in modern management, we don't consider slack in the system. Some extra room for people to be creative, or some extra room for people to rejuvenate themselves after heavy project work and met the deadline type of thing. I don't think we, even in the Agile community, talk enough about Slack and why that should be present, and if it's not present, that might be bad.
Once worked with a team that said the term sprint is really unnerving. We're always running as fast as we can. And when they realized this in the retrospective, they put in a stopper. At the end of every second week, they took the Friday to do whatever they liked. And they managed to convince management very easily. They just created a dashboard for their product and work that did monitoring that everybody wanted to have for ages, but it never really got up to the top of the backlog. And they just said, that's so much fun doing this, let's do this. And whenever people were standing in front of this and discussing, are we doing well or are we doing bad, they were reminded this was the initiative of Slack time. And that was pretty convincing. And maybe a bit of luck, but
yeah, that's also my experience when the teams take the ownership of their backlog. I've seen two things. One type of teams seeing themselves as the victims of the evil management who doesn't allow them to breathe. I've seen teams who have been really taking ownership of their backlog and their time and their energy and really planning slack time in. And that's the thing that is maybe the danger with going into a sprint way of working. In Agile, we say we need to have a sustainable pace, but the word sustainable is often forgotten. And if the teams don't take the ownership of that sustainability aspect, nobody will do it for them. Right. So it's a super important aspect, I think.
I agree. John, you have something.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, if there's maybe some confusion over, or just lack of agreement over what we mean when we say slack time. From a systems thinking approach, slack time has to do, I think, more with the ability to recover, from a possible failed experiment, not so much to, I think, give people some reprieve from work so that they can emotionally readjust or heal from whatever strain or damage they've received because they've been working at an unsustainable pace. And sure. Those two, I think, have different implications for the business. The business would normally say that you have slack time every day when you clock out and go home or go wherever you go when you're not at work. And so that slack time, maybe you haven't been using it, but it's there on every 24-hour cycle, at least. The other kind of slack time, the first that I mentioned, where we're talking about building a plan that does not require every action to be successful. It accounts for a failure inside of a work system that is unpredictable and only roughly forecastable. And so if we blur those two topics together, I think we might find that we're misunderstood by people that aren't familiar with agility or systems thinking.
Sure. So in that education of that, how would you approach this with creating more stories where that can be well understood? What would be your approach to educating people on this?
Yeah, I think that when I'm creating a narrative, I'm describing inside that narrative the serendipity that's usually involved with innovation or any kind of complex work that's done in a complex problem space, and that when we work to create value, it's more touch and go or trial and error, with an emphasis on the error being a majority of the spend of time. And so when success is achieved and new value is created or innovation has taken place, we build in to the cost, at least retrospectively looking, but hopefully in our planning, we build in the cost of the trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just you're on a fool's errand if you think that you can flip a coin and 100% of the time it will land on heads, or it will land on tails, or it will land on whatever side you predicted it'll land on next. Irrational, and it is the modern model. If we're talking about a command and control predictive model, which has permeated the work culture since the industrial age. Fortunately, we're not working in most agile environments on mass production, which has more productivity to it than innovation. And so slowly but gently through our narratives, making people aware of the fact that we've been misapplying management models to work probably around the last 50 to 100 years.
Okay, yeah. I was just thinking, look, I mean, see, as I'm a Scrum Master and I do, what we get stuck is with the people, what we have. So what we have tried was give a DISC test, DISC test, so that the personalities can be, we know what kind of people to put in a team to get the work done, or to get their vision, whatever they commit, to fulfill their commitment, because the personality comes into picture here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my input on that one. So we are trying at our company. So we were trying to place people based on their attitude towards work, so that the stress level can be reduced, because certain people can function at certain, some personalities can take certain level of stress when they're exposed to certain assignments. So if you can bring that DISC test, personality test into the team, that might help. So we are trying it out and see where it goes. So
that's interesting, because what and we've done DISC tests for multiple years and other things, looking at people's type A, type B, and all the other different ways that you can go off and measure a person, and balance teams, creating the right crew for the type of work that's being done. I think you hit it spot on, which I think most managers don't look at their team and understand that, even in the self-organization sense, that if I put all of these achievers on this, and there's some people there that are much more in that sort of listening space where they have to comprehend data a little bit differently and are deeper thinkers about stuff. And if everyone's just diving in and just cannibalizing the architecture, and this other person saying, wait, we really need to think this through, stress level does go up in those teams. So
right, we are just trying it as a trial and see where it takes. We are trying to get the best out of the team, so that they are happy and they are least stressful. And plus, they can collaborate pretty well too. If you can put the dominant character who wants to take power and then do everything on their own, with the people who are a little shy, if you blend in together, they learn from each other, and you can change their personalities too if they work together. So if you team up that way.
Yeah, over time, that definitely does occur, because I noticed that since I've been taking the DISC survey over the last several decades, originally came from the whole PMI, project management background type of space. As I left engineering and went into management, I was using that toolkit that was a lot more based upon certainty and our artificial certainty that we go create in our Microsoft project plans way back when. But over time, as I've been, using Agile, I have, in fact, my DISC survey has changed. I'm a different person because of that.
Just one quick comment about managers assembling teams of members with different personalities. I believe that if we were using self-organization, that team members would be self-selecting, meaning that you elect or volunteer to join a team based on all of the information available to the entire system. So if I knew my own personality type and I knew that the personality types of other people that are proposing to form a team together, I can self-regulate, meaning I can decide to not join that team because I don't think that it would be a fit or that I couldn't sustain, whatever tension it is that could potentially exist on that team. Or if I decided to join it and then later felt that it was unsustainable for me, I'd be able to opt out. And having the ability to opt out of a team or having the authority to form your own team, I think is a different paradigm than the one that you mentioned, where traditionally managers have been in charge of assigning people to teams, much like they would assign work to specific people.
Right. And so I was at a conference a number of years ago, and I had a chance to sit down and talk with some people from WordPress. And WordPress, as a fully virtual company, I asked, well, how does somebody join a team at WordPress? And it was exactly the process that you described. Somebody would be interested in that work, and they would approach the team and say, hey, can I join in on the project? And since it was open source, they would give the person an assignment, and slowly over time, the individual would say, hey, well, I want to join this team permanently. And I think I'm a fit here. And I thought that model of come join us for a little bit, see if you like it. And if you don't, then you become a freelancer for a little bit, and eventually you'll find your right place in the company. I think that's a beautiful concept and idea that most companies I don't think can fathom because of their measurement of headcount and human resources and other things, that they think that journey of getting that people that amount of room is something that you don't do.
Yeah. I think essentially there's a bureaucratic meritocracy format to organizational behavior, and then there's a networked equality-based approach to organizational behavior. And it's hard to be a tweener in there. You're either kind of gravitating towards one mode or gravitating towards another. And certainly the WordPress example that you gave is a networked equality-based view.
Right, and a very agile view of it.
I totally agree.
So let's go ahead and shift off to the main questions, and it's actually from a segue perspective. This conversation we're having right now kind of blends into this first question, which is how to implement Agile in everyday business processes. Does anyone want to take a stab at kind of expanding on this at all?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Just look at that super secret technology that we call the 12 principles of Agile and see how they apply to any given process. I know it's hard to get to them because you have to click under the link under the Agile Manifesto, and not everyone does. But I think the principles, well written with initially with software in mind, can be applied to any business process or even further, and just see which of those apply, right? If we focus on value and have the team self-organize on getting the work done, we're basically on our way to being agile, right?
I agree with that. I mean, I jokingly said, if they ever have a waterfall development conference someplace, that if they just implemented the Agile values on top of waterfall would improve. I don't recommend it, though. I don't recommend going that direction. But anyway, who else? Anyone else? Go ahead.
Just to add one thought here, it depends a bit on the business process. There might actually be a business process that is very well done in waterfall because it doesn't require constant change. It's not subject to changing environmental things. If you do things the same way over and over again, you should really consider whether Agile is the solution you need.
I totally agree to that. It's really always a question of fit for purpose, and agility is not the answer to every problem in the world. So we need to acknowledge that. But I would add another thing about related to this question, and that is actually there is already a number of practical examples and people working on implementing agility in everyday business processes. So there are Agile HR conferences, numerous of them. People are really progressing. There is Agile finance, if you will, and Agile leadership kind of conferences. So I think there's a lot of offers, and I think people can be directed to these events where they can learn from others how to do these things.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been to a couple of those events, and being more from an engineering background, but to hear how they've made adaptations to fitting, because Scrum, if a way of managing a delivery of something, it doesn't have to be a block of software. It could be a document being delivered. It could be other sets of other business value that's delivered through it. The one single process, though, that I think that all businesses can and directly benefit from is putting in a normal retrospective process about reflecting on how we approach the work and whether or not we, what are ways that we can go improve the way that we deliver things. I think would be big.
I mean, one thing I've seen also recently is that especially there is a natural gravity towards agile approaches for any business processes that are dealing with a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability. So, for example, I've seen a number of marketing and sales organizations starting to adapt agile ways of working. So they start building similar structures according to the Scrum framework. They start working in sprints and using minimum viable products and so on. Those ideas, they are really spreading in these kind of organizations.
So how would you start to implement that? How would you approach a non-software development team and say, here is a set of methods that you might want to give a try? What would be your approach to getting somebody to try something there?
For myself, I think that asking that question and then holding space for people to think about it and formulate possible answers, create experiments, and then run them is how I would pose that question, rather than placing a bunch of practices or methodologies on the table and saying, try this, it's worked in other contexts. And so a framework that engages people in wondering out loud with each other about how Agile could be applicable to their context is open space agility. And I've seen that work in organizations and organizations that don't necessarily create software or products, but rather configure ERP systems or answer phone calls about software. And so I agree with you. The retrospective is the only thing that I can see being clearly applicable to any human endeavor towards improving, the process that's used in that endeavor. And the question that remains open, I think, is at what scale are you looking to ask people who do the work those questions about how they want to proceed with doing the work?
Mm-hmm. And part of that human element that you're talking about there, the way most, if I think about process improvement when I was in strategic planning for a number of years, to penetrate and to think of an adjacent set of methods and to say, does that method apply to us? That requires, I think, and this is when I say the word leadership, I mean leadership by everyone who's working in the team. That requires them to have to go off and think a little bit more openly about how they're facing some of the problems that they're dealing with.
One thing that is very helpful apart from retrospectives in my experience is creating the right focus by talking about delivery, customer, and value. So what are we really doing? What is success for us? And the most simple way to get this done is trying to find deliverable items and form a backlog. So what are we going to deliver first, second, third? That as well is something that not every business process brings by itself. A lot are structured around tasks and work packages, but not around benefits for others.
Every time you do a retrospective, it's basically for process improvement, which if it is properly implemented, you can eliminate, you can reduce, I can't say eliminate, reduce technical debt.
And that's technical debt even in other business processes. It doesn't mean technical debt just in my software code. It could be technical debt in anything that I've got. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I think just the fact that as you're reflecting on the work product that you do versus just jumping to the next fire, I think it just gives you that sort of breather of, wow, I'm really, in fact, we could have approached this way differently. And by the way, that diverse mindset that we talked about in the beginning of the call, having a group of people, especially if you're retrospecting on maybe a crisis that just occurred, to have some outsiders come in and offer perspective versus just the people who just went through the firefight.
Yeah, and one more thing, if you whatever. In the retrospective, if you use that one for the next sprint as a metrics, that's the best thing to do because you're immediately implementing it. So that way your process is getting improved and you're incorporating quality into the product too. So
I fully agree. I am going to go ahead and pivot to the next one unless someone wants to dive in on here.
One thing I just wanted to add, I really liked, I think is it pronounced Jorg? His point about creating the backlog and how that draws people's focus to something that's visualized, the goal and possibly a breakdown of the work. I think that when that's put up on a wall somewhere or made visual where people are bound to stumble onto it, it triggers reflection and collaboration, like you say. And, those that are affected by it, presumably customers. In the case of crises, maybe it's even some victims. But getting every person's piece of the truth out in front of all the people involved in doing the work is going to improve, again, like any business endeavor. And so, thank you, George, for bringing that up. I can see now that could be a universally applicable aspect of agility to business.
Yeah, it's thanks for that feedback, and it's something I've seen with people starting on Agile. They sometimes really challenged by the retrospective and the attitude of fast improvement because they are a bit afraid of improvement. But getting a meaning added to their work in terms of there's really somebody consuming this, waiting for this, even eager to have it, is sometimes the easier start. And at least in my experience, this is true for a lot of supporting processes that very often only get the feedback in the beginning from negative things. Mm-hmm. Like when you're in HR, more people complain to you than thank you for work well done. And sometimes it's good if you can make visible that actually, yes, you are contributing something positive to this world. And by the way, that's my take on HR. They are more often positive than negative. Extremely.
Right. And the visualization itself, just to add one more point to this, and this is at least a pattern I've seen with large companies. This notion that the walls need to look corporate and clean and, all straight lines with posters that are all in the corporate guidelines of where these posters should be mounted and put. And then if you try to go put up a Kanban board someplace or some other visualization technique, and then the corporate police come after you and say, that looks messy, that to me is a strong anti-pattern of a company that's afraid of radical openness. Then that radical openness, I believe, is a breeding ground, as John, you were saying, just the ability to do really cool new stuff because it opens the minds. So let's go ahead and pivot to the next question. So the next question is, and I think we've had one of these similar before in the past, but since it's back up here and a lot of votes for it, we should talk about it. How do you help traditional project managers transition to agile project management? Do we put them in a box and then, slowly, break them down into, they can be reprogrammed? Or how do we do this? Hendrik, what do you think?
Define agile project management. I mean, agile
goodness.
project management for me is a quite different thing because you're creating a sustainable pace. You're more going from a project to a program management kind of mode. And what traditional project managers are doing is also distributed in a different way because some of the project management tasks are going to be done by the team itself. So at the end of the day, what it means is that if you are a traditional project manager, you, like other leaders, need to learn to let go and empower the teams and use rather the feedback loops for making predictions and keeping the project, as management calls it, on track, finding out what's going on. Mm-hmm. So the main point for me is in the transition means we need to implement feedback loops that destroys this illusion of control that many traditional project managers have, and give them a chance to let the emergent things be collected and acted upon.
Do you think that within that scope, I'm thinking of my own transition myself, and I know as a traditional project manager, I was always pushing for stuff to get done, pushing for this outcome that I was put in charge of, that's where we need to be. Versus as time went on, as we were doing more agile development, one of the things that I noticed is that it didn't matter what I thought, it was how much pull was coming from a customer or a stakeholder, and that became more important. And I was no longer pushing stuff through. I was actually just being, the advocate for the reason why that particular feature needs to get out first, because that strong pull that we have from the customer over here or over there.
Yeah. Then you have a number of product owners who are helping you with that, who are working day to day closely to the teams.
Yes.
You have Scrum Masters helping the teams to reflect. We have retrospectives, so teams are starting to own their velocity and so on. So it's really quite an interesting transition that you make when you're a traditional project manager. I mean, I remember that it's a bit like you said, Ray. You're used to push. By default, mistrust people and rather call them 3 times a day to make sure that they really understood and that the information ends up on your table, right?
Right.
and then with the introduction of agile, of agility, of agile structures, you can let go of all these things. And at the beginning, it's damned hard because you think something is going wrong and I'm not in control of it, but when you have the feedback loops, and that's so important that you have the feedback loops from the sprint demos, you get a natural flow of information that helps you to see what's going on and in a much more relaxed way actually be able to say, okay, here we now need to pay attention and maybe this team needs to start acting on something, and you can give your impulses.
Right.
Can we concise this one to one word? It's basically project manager transitioning to agile is based on the mindset. If they're open-minded and then adapt easily, transition becomes easy.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you deal with the fact that if you look at the way the traditional role gets broken up into multiple people, and that's the person feeling scared that they're giving up one aspect of control. I mean, how do you help that person through that transition?
That's basically the person's mindset itself. Because the world is changing, the management thinks the whole things are changing. You got to change your mindset basically. So from command and control to collaborate, if that's your mindset, you should be, the transition becomes easy.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, your survival, so your personal survival is going to be tough. I can't have my command and control attitude and then keep collaborating. It's a conflict there. So only thing can change is the mindset itself.
Okay.
I think the conversation so far on this topic, though, has actually avoided answering the question. We've described, what a transition would look like, or what's the essence of the transition, and we've described it as easy, but we haven't actually said what actions will you take to help a traditional project manager to transition. Yeah, I would say that the actions that you would take would start with invitation, and it would include being the change that you want to see. In other words, we've made all these statements about push versus pull, and what I wouldn't do is push a project manager into changing their mindset, because that wouldn't be congruent. It wouldn't be me using pull, it would be me using push. So the opposite of pushing somebody into a mindset change would be inviting them into that. Pull is an invitation type of thing, and so maybe inviting them into some coaching, establishing a very clear and explicit coaching alliance. If they did say yes to an optional, not a mandatory coaching relationship with me. And then when I'm coaching with them, giving them invitations to try something out, experiment with something, which they don't have to do. And it wouldn't be me giving them that as the answer. But those are the actions that I would take to try to help.
It's interesting that you caught us admiring the problem, which, we should stop doing that.
One action I would try to take is identify the strengths of this project manager and build on it. Normally, the strengths relates to an opportunity within the new mindset, new way of working. So if you have somebody who's really good in making things happen, he's probably very helpful as a Scrum Master because he's already very well connected in the organization. And if you're a bit lucky, he hates the pushy part and the schedule part. Or if you have somebody who's really, really keen on making the schedule happen, point out that really matters, but more in terms of getting the right things done instead of getting the right time on the clock. So he probably gets more into a product owner role, and there are so many other options. But acknowledge that there is already some strengths in this person, and in his past, he wouldn't be in that position if there's not something he can do well. Right. Hopefully, at least.
I try to sell them on the benefits they'll get out of the more agile process. If the team is doing Scrum, instead of tracking down the developers to get status, the developers will be happy to show up on a regular cadence and show him what they've done during the iteration, right? Instead of trying to push your agenda, the team is going to come and ask which of these things has the most value to the product. Suddenly you have more time to focus on, the more maybe lofty goals of your project instead of doing all of this small bureaucratic work, which gets
expose strengths and opportunities of the process. So that might bring them pretty interested.
So one of the tools that I use when I do the leadership class that I teach is we have the person, here's the new team that's forming up. Here are the current roles that we have maybe defined in Scrum or some other agile process that we're coming up with. And then we ask like the traditional project managers to write down everything that they do during the day. What are your daily tasks? What are your weekly tasks? What are your quarterly tasks that you need to go do? And then we ask them to take if these are the new roles that are being formed up, say like a product owner, a Scrum Master, and a member of the development team, take each of those tasks that you have there and think to yourself whether or not they belong to a different role now, and go ahead and put those up where you think, after we've described what those roles are, where do you think that task belongs? And what we find is that the person will go through this stack of stuff that they had written down. They will have put stuff that up on the wall that belong to these new roles, but then they have a whole bunch of stuff that's still in front of them. And I typically will ask them the question, do you believe that the things that you have on the table, because you've been doing all of those other things that you now gave to these other roles, have you been able to really spend the time and do those things correctly or right? And most people will say, I barely have enough time to do the stuff that I've got left on the table. So they can start to see a visualization that the process that's coming in is now actually helping them, because they can now focus on more of the strategic work that they've been ignoring. So that's another method you guys might be able to use in your own work.
I got one more input for this one. See, I worked as a business analyst, so which I brought in my gap analysis technique to the transition. What we are doing right now, what needs to be done, where do we fill this gap in? So expose it to the team and say, these are the places we need to go ahead. So that worked with one of the teams.
Okay, explain the process just a little bit more. How you did it.
We analyze the current process, and then we put a roadmap of where we need to go.
Okay.
So it's more like a roadmap, and a gap analysis. Like, this is what we do, this is where we are heading to, and these needs to be done, and put little milestones.
Okay. And so you let the team fill in that middle gap. So you've
exactly.
got your goal over there. As a team, how are we going to do it?
Exactly. And at every milestone, we checked ourselves. This was what was planned, where we are, and what should be done next. Whether we fulfilled or we need to. It's like rolling wave planning.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I like that as well. Do we want to pivot to the last question of the day?
Sounds good.
Well, let's go ahead and do that. And so, should I have to read this, Jörg? This is your question.
I can do this. So, what are best practices to distinguish project, product, delivery, and strategic goals in order to focus management, business, the organization, and maybe even the shareholders?
Ooh.
So I can give a bit of background. So what I've observed in many organizations, that what is really the goal? Are we spending time just on a project of 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, or do we do something bigger, or do we even envision this company to still be around when the CEO is long dead and gone? There's no understanding of different levels that is continuous, transparent, whatever, but this makes a big difference towards agile mindset in my experience. So I'm looking for good ideas how to make it more transparent.
Sure. Do you believe today that if you had to look at the types of goals that your company goes off and throws out, however they do KRs or whatever the bigger meta goals are for the organization, do you see a linkage on all the way down through your organization for that work today?
Definitely not a conscious one. That is really consistent. It blurs as soon as the time horizon goes beyond the first project.
Right. So it's sort of like, we used to do strategic 5-year plans. That's, we think the market will be here, and therefore we should start making investments in these spaces and other things. And a lot of it, as far as, getting it down to the meaningful to the team, that sometimes was a big, huge disconnect. Or maybe the team started to go work off in that area, and then the management said, "Why are you doing that? We don't have to be there for 5 years. You don't start working on that now."
I mean, the current good practice around this that has emerged now in a lot of companies is working with OKRs, objectives and key results. So there are a lot of companies now that are implementing this way of working that I don't remember exactly where this originated. I think Google or one of those companies, where you have your company visions, your, strategic bets and so on, and you break them down until you have concrete activities for the next 3 months. And then it's a rolling thing.
Yeah, this is something that actually, when I was with Intel, we practiced that since the 80s, and there's pros and cons to it. The pro is that if you set the right strategic goals and the key results that feed up into those have coherency through the organization, then it works well. When it doesn't work well is that some of the targets that are picked, trying to manage the purchasing habits of some of our customers, to most development organizations themselves, they don't see how they clearly link into the profitability of certain things or certain cells, closing certain cells in certain areas. So that focus on the shareholder side, they're always looking at the revenue, and the people in the engineering teams are trying to decode what the heck should I build. You know?
Yeah, but I think this is less a problem of the process itself. I think OKR as such is a good and promising thing, but then the way you implement it is, of course, another question.
Mm-hmm.
Like Scrum is a great framework, but depending on how you implement it, with what mindset, you can end up in very different places, right?
Right. Well, one technique that I've used in order to help establish strategic goals, and this is something that I learned from some people over at Cognitive Edge, which is this future backwards, where you use you look at the current state of where you're at, look at the current attributes and things that you might have there, and then you kind of work your way back in time to go look at the turning points that might have gotten you there. And then you look at two other scenarios. You look at a scenario of what is the worst thing that can happen to us, and how to and look at turning points of how we might get there. And then we look at the top thing, which is the what would heaven look like in 3 months or 4 months or maybe even a year. And from a visualization tool, to look not just at what we could be, and also look at what might happen to us depending on what we could do wrong. We could find some gaps in the way that we might even cognitively approach goal setting and types of decisions that we think we need to take. That pattern might actually look exactly like the pattern that gets us to the bad state. So you can start to go look to see whether or not, one, do we have a coherent view of what heaven looks like for all of us and the goals that we have, and then we also know what the pitfalls that we should be looking for as we're going along that path. And I think that's a missing gap in certain goal setting that's done today. We always look at the positive side. John, you had something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a framework called Flow that was created by two gentlemen from Dublin, Hayden Shaughnessy and Finn Golden. And they use radical openness or visualization from the C-level on through the rest of the organization. And the way that I obviously can't describe it in a few sentences, but if you can imagine sort of an Obeya approach, which is a lean approach where you use all the walls of a large room to try to visualize everything that the entire organization is undertaking in their portfolio. You could kind of get a glimpse of what flow is about. And they refer to like a bunch of different kinds of walls, where a wall is a graphic representation of like things like a user segment or a customer problem or the ecology of the entire corporate group. And then they have things like cool walls, which are descriptions of what's going on in the company that's cool and maybe what's going on that's not so cool. Opportunities for improvement, so experiments that are going on. And you can kind of see like how much focus or lack of focus is happening organizationally, not just at the team level. And they've seen a lot of success. They have case studies like I think Aviva and Paddy Power out in Europe, and I see a lot of potential for that in the way that you're asking, maybe kind of a portfolio management level, but that is completely global in what gets captured and visualized.
I'm going to go start to dig up some pictures in that space. I think that would be great. We are at the top of the hour, and this is the last phone call of the year. So I'm a little sad, but I know that, you guys are going to go off and have an absolutely wonderful holidays. If you guys haven't seen yet, there's probably a new email that came in. I added some of the 2019 dates for the Agile Coaching Network. As always, you're welcome to reach out in between time. Please encourage people to go listen to the podcast. We just passed by the 13,000 mark, which is pretty good for us. The more people that join, the more that we amplify the great learnings that all of you who've come and has shared your thoughts and ideas over this year. I cannot thank you enough. That's what makes, I think, our call popular, and it also helped a lot of other people. I was told by one person that they said that they don't have any other coaches in their company, and they come to this call because they feel that they finally have a community that they can be a part of. And that to me says, man, we're doing the right things here. So I appreciate all of that, and all of you, happy holidays. This podcast is provided by the Agile Alliance for educational and informative purposes only. To find out more information about the member-supported Agile Alliance, please go to agilealliance.org to find out about more upcoming events, as well as different programs that are available to help you with your Agile journey.